all they needed was a trigger to put it in place, and that is what 9/11 provided them with.
They only think in terms of power. Democracy and constitutional states don't play a role.
The truth is, conspiracies do sometimes occur.
I can only say, the official story is so inadequate and far-fetched that there must be a different one. Michael Meacher and Andreas von Bülow, two former ministers. The Germans served under Helmut Schmidt 25 years ago. More recently, the Brit was a minister in Blair's war government. These two experienced politicians have grave doubts about what the Americans call the war on terrorism. More importantly, they think there's a lot more behind September 11th than we're allowed to know.
You have to consider what happened before 9/11, at 9/11, and afterwards. And I think a much better explanation than the war on terror, which I think is bogus, is given by the Project for the New America Century document. That was written in September 2000, just before or in the course of the US presidential election, which brought George Bush to power. It was written by a neoconservative think tank. It was called Strengthening America's Defenses. And what it says, I think, gives a much better explanation of what happened before 9/11, of why 9/11 was such a disaster, and why after 9/11 the US was so slow to go after either Al-Qaeda or bin Laden, or didn't seriously try to do so.
The former British minister is referring to this document, Rebuilding America's Defenses, Reorganizing the American Armed Forces. This document forms the basis of Bush's military foreign policy. It says, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States must protect the new American century using military means particularly. Saddam Hussein has to go. But more importantly, we have to obtain military control in the region to get a grip on the world's raw materials, especially oil. For this, we need more troops, not less. It's hard to explain this to the American people. It will take years. Unless we can use an event similar to Pearl Harbor as a catalyst to turn public opinion around towards spending more money on this struggle for world domination. And exactly 1 year later, this new Pearl Harbor happened. And the government immediately said, this is our new Pearl Harbor. Rebuilding America's defenses was not America's first research into possible threats to the country. In 1997, Jimmy Carter's security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, was worried about the lack of American control in Central Asia and the Middle East. In his book, The Grand Chessboard, he claimed that control could only be gained by pursuing a much more aggressive foreign policy, including warfare. At the same time, Brzezinski realized the Americans didn't really want a war. He claimed this attitude was only likely to change after a complete disruption. My wife was in the kitchen and called out, "Something terrible has happened." I saw it, and my first reaction was, Who has anything to gain by this? Initially, I simply followed what was happening. I sympathized with the victims and wondered about the consequences. As I had some experience in the Secret Service, I soon started thinking, I wonder what exactly is going on. Is there something else that they're not telling us? That's quite a statement. But the fact remains Brzezinski's total disruption happened on September 11th, enabling Bush to pursue an aggressive foreign policy.
You have to consider what happened before 9/11, at 9/11, and afterwards. Before 9/11, the U.S. administration received a great deal of information that an attack was coming. First of all, there were 11 countries, including the UK, which gave their intelligence to the US authorities to that effect. Mossad sent 2 experts in August 2001, 1 month before 9/11, to the States with a list of 200 Islamic suspects, 4 of whom turned out to be the hijackers. None of them were arrested. On the 6th of August 2001, 1 month before 9/11, Condoleezza Rice had produced information about the possibilities of a hijacking, which could be related to the Intelligence Council's report. There was evidence which came from Zacharias Moussaoui, who was arrested. He was the 20th hijacker, most people think he was. He was arrested, and the FBI agent wanted to investigate his computer, which we now know contained some clues as to 9/11, but the information came through from the top levels of the FBI that they didn't want any arrests.
Meacher is referring to the Moroccan Zacharias Moussaoui. He was arrested by the FBI in August 2001. French intelligence claimed he could be linked to Osama bin Laden and a possible attack on the United States. Moussaoui had a laptop when he was arrested. Oddly enough, the FBI agents weren't given permission to investigate it. Permission wasn't granted until a month later, on September 11th. The agents found detailed information about the hijackers and the attack. Why didn't the FBI get the chance to read this information earlier? Who prevented further investigation? Who prevented the investigation in Paris? Several desperate CIA and FBI agents protested to the bosses. The fact that FBI agents did warn people became clear in this document. Written July 10th, 2001. The report was by an FBI branch in Phoenix. The contents were clear and alarming. Arabian men were being trained at flying schools and shooting ranges. The Phoenix FBI agents advised, the Phoenix agency insists on investigating these schools and these types of students and to infiltrate. This warning was disregarded only 2 months before the attack. Or so it seemed. The CIA was keeping an eye on 14 of the 19 hijackers, such as Mohammed Atta in Hamburg, without the Germans knowing it. Unknown to the FBI, other secret services were active too. Later, it became clear that the U.S. Army leadership knew long before the attack about the identity and whereabouts of the leading hijacker, Mohammed Atta. Intelligence officers were prepared to share this information, but the Ministry of Defense put a stop to that.
The first hijack occurred latest about 8:20 a.m. For the next hour and 40 minutes, no aircraft was put into the air, even though there was at the U.S. Andrews Air Force Base 10 miles from Washington, D.C., a flight of F-16, a whole squadron of top-level fighters. No planes were flown in from other air bases, even though at top speed they were certainly within range. Why did that happen? We know that where an aircraft goes on course, it is a legal requirement that aircraft are put into the air to check on the position and purpose of commercial aircraft. Why on this single day did it not happen? In the previous 9 months it had happened 67 times. It was a routine procedure. Why did this not happen on that very important day? That question has never been answered.
To summarize, 11 countries warned about an attack on the United States. The CIA received a list with 200 suspects before September 11th. Security advisor Condoleezza Rice warned the president about a hijacking. The United States government ignored warnings by several FBI agents. Mohammed Atta had been identified as a leader of an al-Qaeda cell in 2000. Defense did not give out that information. After the hijacking, it took 100 minutes for the first fighter jets to take off. Remarkable facts. Had the independent investigators of the September 11th attacks nodded off?
It was a 580-page avoidance of any serious explanation. If you look at it, and of course I have, only the first chapter goes into looking at what actually happened at 9/11 and leading up to it. All the rest, which is far and away the great majority of the report, is not actually about 9/11 as such at all, but it is about the kind of alternative arrangements or preparations that America needs to make in future to avoid it happening again. And indeed, there is one statement it makes which I think sums up the whole report. It is widely known and believed that Lieutenant Mahmoud Ahmed, who was the head of Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, the ISI, asked a known Islamic militant called Omar Saeed Sheikh to wire $100,000 to Mohammed Atta, the leading hijacker, in the period leading up to 9/11. That has since been confirmed by the FBI. What the report, the official investigatory report says is that the US has never been able to find the sources of financing for 9/11. And then they say this: that, after all, is a matter of no great importance. I find that astonishing. It is a matter of absolutely central importance. So there was a very great deal of evidence, and it seems to me extraordinary that the United States, with its stupendous military capabilities and the most technologically advanced country in the world, completely and totally failed to follow up these leads. I think that 9/11 provided the trigger to enable the US administration under George Bush to put in place a geopolitical strategy to seek American control.
They made sacrifices. Most likely, it's an operation in psychological warfare. It's a form of war, and in a war, it's acceptable when people die, even on your own side. In this deception, killing is allowed to achieve a higher goal.
All that I can say is, let other people make their judgments about 9/11. If they think that the war on terrorism explains it, I would like to know why all the facts about the failure to respond before, at, and after can be explained. If they needed a trigger, then finding that an attack was planned was an exceedingly convenient pretext. And I think they used it. Governments, and people don't like to think of this, governments can be ruthless.
They only think in terms of power. Democracy and constitutional states don't play a role. That's the philosophy behind it, which unfortunately is shared in the United States by both parties. People with moral objections don't stand a chance.
The truth is, conspiracies do sometimes occur. In history, there's no doubt about that. When you look at that evidence, it is so compelling, so comprehensive, that it is very difficult, in my view, to come to a different conclusion from the one that I do.
What was the September 11th attack other than an attack? Was it the great disruption the conservatives were waiting for? Enabling this new, more aggressive United States policy. Now there is public support in the United States for a war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and threats towards Syria, Iran, and Korea. A cynical politician might say, every disadvantage has an advantage.
They are facts. They're uncomfortable facts. They're shocking facts. Deeply, deeply shocking. But you have to face up to them because they have actually happened. And they demand an explanation which is the most cogent, the most compelling, the most plausible to fit those facts. We do need to know the truth. We do need to know the truth.